The pages that you create in ASP.NET websites are known as web form pages. Unlike conventional web pages, these are always built as data entry forms, which post back to the server for server-based processing. For all of the demonstrations in this chapter, I'll use a set of files that's in a website that's a part of the exercise files provided with the video series. When you create a brand new ASP.NET page, you have the opportunity to either include all of the scripting code for the page in the page itself, or to separate the content into two files, one the HTML page and two the code file. In this demonstration, I'll create a page that includes its own scripting code. I'll start by selecting Website, Add New Item. I'll select Web Form from the Templates list, and I'll create a new file called pagewithcode.aspx, and I'll set the language to Visual C#. Now for this page, I'm going to deselect the option Place Code in Separate File, and click Add. The page is created. With the page in Source View, I'll click into the title element and type in Page with Code, and I'll do the same thing in the div tag inside the form. Notice that the page is created with a set of form elements with the RunAt attribute set to server, meaning that the page is enabled for server-side processing. Within the div tag, I'll create an h1 tag set. I'll type in less than character than h1, and when I close the tag, the end tag is provided for me, and then once again I'll type in the text page with code. Now I'll switch to design view, and I'm going to add two controls to the page. I'll press enter to create a new paragraph. Then I'll go to the toolbox, and I'll drag in a label from the standard section of the toolbox, and I'll place it inside that paragraph that was just created. This is a web form control. Each web form control can have a unique identifier. With the control selected, I'll go to the Properties panel. I'll scroll down to the end and I'll find the ID, and I'll change the ID of the label control to My Label. I type in the ID and then press enter to save the change. Now, I'll click right after the label in that paragraph and press enter, and that creates another paragraph. I'll go back to the toolbox, and this time I'll drag in a button control. The button control is essentially a form submit button. When the user clicks it, it causes the page to be posted back to the server, and any server-side code that I want to include in the page will be executed. With the button control selected, I'll go back to the Properties panel, and I'll locate the text property. I'll change the text property of the button to simply Click Me, and press enter. Notice that in the design view on the left, that change is reflected immediately. Now, to make something happen, I'm going to double-click on the control. When I double-click, Visual Web Developer automatically generates a method or a function called button1click. The structure of the function is already appropriately constructed to react to the click event that happens when the user clicks the button. When the user clicks that button, I'm going to react by executing a little bit of server-side code that changes the text property of the label, like this. I'll type in MYL and I'll see my label listed in the list of available objects. I'll press the dot character to autocomplete it. Then I'll start typing TEXT for text, and I'll see the text property with an uppercase T listed there. I'll press the spacebar, and then I'll put in an equal sign, which in C# is the assignment operator, and then I'll complete the programming statement with a literal string of value set at server. And then I'll complete the statement with a semicolon. Let's take a look at all of the code and see how it works. I have the function called button1_click. If I scroll down and take a look at the button component, I'll see that it has a runAt equals server attribute, which means that any code that's being executed is executed at the server level rather than in the browser. And then an attribute called onClick, which names the function that's going to be called, button1_click. I'll save my changes, and I'll run the page by selecting Debug, Start Without Debugging. When the page first appears, the label displays its default value of label. I'll click the button, the page is posted back to the server, and when it's returned, the text property of the label is changed to the literal string value set at server. So that's the basic architecture of a web form page. Each web form control that you place on the page has features that can execute certain code at the server level. Not all code is capable of being executed at the ASP.NET server level. There are certain features that must be executed by the browser. Typically, those processes are written in JavaScript code rather than in C# or in Visual Basic. Only the server is able to execute programming instructions in those two languages. It's also important to note that in this particular page, I'm including the scripting code in the page itself rather than in a separate code file. Some developers prefer putting their code together this way. Other developers prefer to create their pages always with separate code files so that they can separate their HTML markup and their scripting code into two distinct files.